Okay, let's get started. Hello there, and thank you so much for joining my talk today. I'm really excited to be able to be here and share with you some of the stories of mentorship that I have, as well as some tips and tricks that I've picked up over the years. My goal with this presentation is to hopefully inspire you to try your hand at mentorship, or perhaps get back into it if you've been out of the game for a while. This is my first ever RailsConf, and while I hope I can be there someday in person, I'm so honored to be able to be here today. So, before we get started, I just wanted to share with you, if you would like to follow my slides on your device, I've prepared a URL at the bottom of this video, as well as the bottom of this slide, that I'm going to read out to you real quick where you can download them. So that's https:// Ramon H. dev/mentorship-stories.pdf. So, a little bit about me. My name is Ramon. What you see here is a photo of me presenting a Raspberry Pi dance mat at a conference. A lot of fun. I'm originally from Chile, but I'm living in Austria right now. I've lived here for a very long time. I'm a developer advocate at CodeC. I'm also a software development contractor, and I've been working for a very long time in Ruby and JavaScript, and more recently, I've been doing Rust and getting into those communities. And yeah, communities are really important to me. I really love getting into these, seeing what people are up to, um, getting empowered by their motivation, getting them motivated by my motivation. And I think by listening and sharing and learning together, we become more powerful as a result. And I've been a part of a number of communities. I've organized some meetups here locally, some conferences, and more recently, I've also been a Mozilla Tech speaker, which is right now more of an informal group of folks who, yeah, it's just a lot of fun. And one thing I'm going to get into a little bit later is my experiences with coding, teaching kids to code or coaching them in coding, which, as I'm sure you will imagine, will play into mentorship. But I'm going to go a little bit further in the past and tell you my experiences getting started, my origin story, if you will. See, a long time ago, when I was in university, I was studying software engineering here at the Technical University of Vienna, and I was having kind of a bad time. That was through my own fault. I wasn't very motivated. German is not my first language, so taking courses in German and learning complex things like mathematics and statistics and algorithms and data structures in German is significantly more difficult, or let's say in a language that's not your first, right? All fairness to German. So um, at the time, I was looking into moving in with my girlfriend, and we were looking for apartments and looking for a base of income so that we could afford to be able to stay there. And I went looking for jobs. I didn't think I was qualified at the time. I didn't have lots of experience in software development, but my girlfriend was very encouraging at the time, and she found an ad for somebody looking for a freelance Mac OS X developer. Now, not being Austrian, freelance was pretty good for me because it meant that some of the paperwork, some of the legal paperwork was easier on me. So I thought I'll give that a try. And I guess I was feeling a little cheeky, and I sent off an application with my CV looking pretty empty, I'm sure. However, the person who was looking for this, he got back to me and he said, "Hey, thanks for applying for this. How about we meet for a coffee at Cafe Mozart?" Now, I know what you're thinking. I'm in Vienna. Of course, we're going to go to Cafe Mozart, a coffee house. Well, a week later, we met up at this coffee house, and I was pretty nervous, of course. I was dressed amicably. And I remember, I'll never forget the way we sat down, we ordered our coffees, and then this person looks at me and he asks me straight up, "Ramon, I seen your CV. You don't actually have any practical experiences. So I have to ask, why are you applying for this job?" I was not ready for this question. However, I guess I was just feeling an odd sense of confidence at the time, and I told him, "Look, I think I can learn quickly. I think for context, I had gotten my first ever MacBook recently, and I was really excited about Mac OS programming and all that sort of thing. I tried out Xcode, which is the development suite for Mac OS to this day. And so I said, look, I think I can learn quickly. I think I think I can get into it really well. And he said, well, okay, I'll tell you what. I've enjoyed talking to you. However, my concern is with your lack of experience. So I'll tell you what. Get this book. What you're seeing here is a cover for the book Cocoa Programming for Mac OS X, 3rd edition, from the Big Nerd Ranch, written by Aaron Hillegas. This is not a picture of my copy of the book. I lent this book to somebody, and I don't know who that is. If you're watching this talk, and if you have my copy, could you please let me know? Anyway, so he gave me this book, and he recommended this book to me, and he started giving me some advice. He's a programmer himself. And he started giving me some advice on things like best practices. He introduced me to the build toolchain for his macOS apps, which was written in Ruby, actually. He introduced me to Ruby on Rails. He showed me how to solve problems. He would sometimes be on the phone with me and show me how to do things. We would work remotely. And over time, he would show me other things like best practices for Git commit histories, how to do the more complex Git things like rebasing and that sort of thing, bisecting and that sort of thing. But what really struck me really hard was one day, a few weeks into our work together, he sent me an email with the subject, "Highly pleased with your work." And this email hit me like a ton of bricks. I was just not ready for the surge in pride, confidence, and motivation in becoming a software developer. And I realized a few years later what this guy was doing was kind of being my mentor. And we're still working together to this day, and he still mentors me in certain parts. Of course, now that I've been at this for quite a while, I'm helping him with some parts as well, staying up to date with, say, Rails best practices or that sort of thing, as he moves into the more business-oriented side. Anyway, he was mentoring me, and I want to use this to transition into what a commonly held definition of mentorship is. Now, a mentorship, as defined on the internet somewhere, is defined as a learning relationship between a more knowledgeable or experienced person guiding one who is less so. And what I want to get out today is a number of things about mentorship that you may or may not realize. First off, mentorship is kind of happening everywhere in our communities, whether we realize it or not. This can be a more direct, formal, I am the mentor, you are the mentee relationship, but it can also take place in more, like I said, informal ways. For example, let's say a pull request. You're looking here at a screenshot from GitHub of a pull request I made to the Rails Girls Summer of Code Teams app in February 3 years ago. Yes, it's 2021, not 2020. This, in case you don't know, Rails Girls Summer of Code was a program for helping get underrepresented folks into open source software development through crowd-funded stipends, where they would, for 3 months, work on lots of different projects, including things like Bundler and some other Ruby and Rails projects. I think the Rails project was there for a while as well. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, so I was helping to organize and be a mentor at these at this yearly program. And in this pull request, I got some feedback. I'm going to read it to you real quick. Solid. I've added some small comments here and there. I think it would be a good opportunity to also clean up and remove some, and it cuts off from there. But what I'm getting at is this feedback is kind of an informal way of having a mentorship. I'm going to show you some other examples of, let's say, indirect or informal mentorship, and that's meetups. What you're looking at here is a photo from the local Vienna.rb Ruby user group. This is a photo that's pretty old. I think it's something like 6 years now. I'm in this photo as well, with significantly shorter hair. That's the arrow pointing to me there. And in these meetups, what was it if not a way for a bunch of folks who are interested in a similar topic, such as Ruby, to get together and share knowledge, talk to one another, eat some snacks, have some fizzy drinks, and learn together. There's, of course, also things like workshops. What you're looking at here is a photo from the PyLadies Flask Workshop. This is a Python group who, if you're not familiar with Flask, from my understanding, it's kind of the Python equivalent to Sinatra. It's a web framework. And this is a workshop to empower underrepresented folks to get into Python programming, just like Rails Girls is the equivalent for Rails and Ruby. Anyway, again, we would sit down and have a couple coaches. I was there as well, and we would learn together by having these not just one-on-one, but also like as a group learning together experiences. So my first experience with mentorship came, as I mentioned earlier, with teaching children to code. I was a bit too shy at the beginning to go to meetups and that sort of thing. So before I did that, I went to my old high school and I asked, hey, would it be okay if I started an after-school activity where I can teach children to code? And they were very happy to allow me, which I'm very grateful for. So my girlfriend and I started, as I said, an after-school activity that we called computer game programming, where we would once a week get together with the kids after school and show them, get them into programming through games. And again, this was kind of a group dynamic that we had. It was a lot of fun because I've got another talk I could give about this. But anyway, I'll keep it short. We would let the kids not just help each other, but also help us as they would get into these environments. I remember there's a kid who, a few years after we stopped doing this activity, got in touch with me asking me for help with the Unreal Engine. Now, for full context, I'm not a game developer. I've never used the Unreal Engine, but the depth that this kid had gone into when we met up, they showed me that they had also picked up some techniques in mentoring and showing me how to use the Unreal Engine. And these can also be more long-term relationships. What you're looking at here is a photo from a group from our group from 2015 of the Rails Girls Summer of Code, which is that program that I mentioned before with empowering open source development entryway for underrepresented folks. Now, what you see here at the bottom left, sitting on the bench on the leftmost side, are the two participants, and around them, including myself on the right, I look so much younger there, are their coaches, and we would just get together on during the week to do some JavaScript and Rails programming together, and it was a lot of fun, and I learned so much as well. More on that later. This, of course, doesn't necessarily have to be in person. We also had a lot of remote things going on with the Rails Girls Summer of Code. What you're looking at here is a series of screenshots that we've posted publicly of our hangouts, of our online hangouts, where we would get together with the whole team and just either talk about how it's going or celebrate the beginning or the end of the Summer of Code. And these are happening all around the world. I'm going to go top left, we've got a team from Colombia, we've got top right, a team from India, and bottom there is our team from Austria. You saw the photo previously. And it's not just related to programming, it's also related to things like to other skills that we have that we can pass on in the tech industry, like public speaking, what I'm doing right now, right? One of my favorite events that's going on around the world is the Global Diversity CFP Day. This is an event that takes place on a yearly basis to encourage folks to not only come up with, to help to workshop folks, not only to come up with topics to give talks about on at conferences, but also, as the CFP part implies, if you're not familiar, that's short for call for proposals, to encourage folks to work on their proposal process and come up with good proposals. And I love this event. It takes place all over the world. This year we did it remotely, so that was a bit different, and I just love this idea of just sharing knowledge with others that can also benefit from that. So let's get into that. The question might be coming, why do mentorship? Why be a mentor? It is a big responsibility, as I'll get into in a bit. So I think there's three groups of people that can benefit from mentorship. One is, of course, the person you're mentoring or your mentee. You can help them with any kind of problems they're having, either in their career, their education, their motivation, their their individual projects, their tasks at their work, or maybe even finding jobs, again, career, which is of course perhaps a bit obvious, but it also benefits other groups of people that I want to showcase as well. It helps you as a mentor. Being exposed to the perspectives of someone who has less experience than you really helps you ground that knowledge that you have. It also helps you, of course, make you a new friend. It helps you expand your worldview. It helps you find these knowledge gaps that you might have in your own thinking, as well as, of course, learn new things. If you're going into a topic with your mentee that perhaps you were never really actively interested in, it helps you stay motivated. And as a community, I feel mentoring helps us all. By mentoring someone, you're also motivating that mentee to become a mentor in the future. And by mentoring each other, we not only, as said, share this knowledge and grow our base, but we also encourage each other to collaborate and to be a little bit more inclusive. I wanted to make a distinction. Please understand that this is not a strict distinction, nor do I have any shade to throw, okay? But I want to make a distinction between mentoring versus teaching in a more classical, traditional sense of teaching, which involves a teacher and some students, for example. So teaching tends to go a little bit more in one direction. The knowledge transfers from the teacher to the students. And in mentorship, I feel that there's more encouraged a behavior of transferring the knowledge both ways. The mentor also learns from the mentee, and the knowledge transfers both ways. So, all of that said, I would like to now transition into sharing some tips and tricks that I've learned over the years in order to be a good mentor. The first is what you would start with when starting a mentor and mentee relationship is to open with the question, what are your goals? Not just in terms of short term, but the long term as well. Also, not just technical goals, but also what they're hoping to get out of this relationship. If you ask someone, hey, how can I help you? You can help them also figure out better by vocalizing what they hope to achieve. And I think that over time, if this is a longer term relationship, then these goals definitely can change over time. So I think it's important to regularly check in with your mentee and ask, hey, have your goals changed over time? Next, I want to talk about encouraging good habits. Now, these habits don't just necessarily have to be technical, as you're about to see. They can also involve things like empathy. By being a mentor, you're going to be using your empathy a lot to be able to understand where your mentee is at right now, and also try and understand and be able to empathize what they're going through. And by doing this, you're also showing them how important empathy is. Now, this is not to say that your mentee might not already be very empathic, but it's also good to showcase that mentors do have that empathy. Next is the point of effective communication. I believe that communication plays a much bigger role in software development than perhaps we give it credit for sometimes. For example, in my experiences as a contractor, to be able to succinctly describe to a client what it is I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it, and how long, depending on the needs and the desires of that client, I think if I can pass this on to my mentee, not only by effectively communicating to them, hey, this is how this works, this is why I think you can do it this way, of course, without being imposing, more on that later, we can encourage them to also prioritize those communication skills. And again, as I said before, mentorship is not just a short-term game, but a long-term one. When I'm mentoring for somebody, I'm not just thinking, how can I how can I help them fix their Git problem right now? How can I help them with their immediate Rails migration problems? It's also thinking, how can I help this person become better at Git history? How can I help this person become better at working with the Rails framework? Excuse me. Yeah. Um, and because it's important to bear in mind that in the future, this person will also be in a mentorship position, as I said previously, and it's important to bear in mind that your mentorship will affect that mentorship, and by extension, mentorship. Is there such a thing as a great mentor? I don't know. As in, with the equivalent of great grandparents and that sort of thing, not as in a fantastic mentor. Anyway, um, yeah, I think it's also important to encourage your mentee to really challenge you as a mentor and ask you tough questions. I have found myself in the past tempted as a mentee to just nod along with whatever my mentor was saying and just say like, okay, if you want it that way, I'll just do it that way. But I think it really helps if I as a mentee am encouraged to say, hey, you know what? Why don't we use active storage? Why don't we switch from Haml back to ERB and that sort of thing, and open up that discussion, but also at the same time narrowing these questions. One question that I get a lot from people who are completely new to programming is the question, which programming language should I learn if I want to work as a web developer? And so what I try to do is try to very gently encourage them to just narrow that question down a little bit. Now, by narrowing doesn't mean making shorter, as you'll see in my next slide. Which programming language should I learn first if I want to work as a web developer? That narrows it down a little bit. It opens it allows the mentee to understand that there's not an end all be all of programming languages. And maybe there isn't a best one, so maybe, tweak that question just a little bit more and ask not which programming language should I learn, but rather what's a good programming language to learn first if I want to work as a web developer. And that's where you can move into my next point, which is to expose versus imposing. What I mean by this is that as programmers, we're awash in lots of different choices for tools as well as best practices that we can use. I'm sure we've all in the past maybe had some pretty interesting discussions about, for example, what the best text editor is for writing Ruby, what the best programming language is, as I said before, for doing web development. Gosh, maybe even coding styles. In JavaScript, for example, putting the curly bracket at the end of the if statement in the same line or the next line, things like this. Or there's also discussions on what's the best operating system for doing your web development in. What kind of hardware you use, if you want to use a mechanical keyboard or a vertical mouse or a trackpad. There's lots of choices out there. Especially one thing that I've been enjoying in my spare time is looking at people's setups and their setups, their computer setups, and I'll find myself thinking, what's the best screen orientations or the screen setups? I see people having like ultra wide monitors or two monitors. What I have is like a monitor here and a vertical monitor here just to try it out, There's also things, like I said, more technical, like Git history styles, rebase versus merge commits, that sort of thing. By showing these to my mentee, as opposed to saying, this is the best one, this is the only one you should use, not only do those things change over time, but also by exposing these and saying, well, this is Emacs, and this is Vim, and this is Visual Studio Code. You allow these developers, these mentees, to make their own decisions, of course showing them, I prefer this, but your mileage might vary. So let's talk about being supportive as a mentor. Because what you're doing as a mentor, of course, is encouraging someone to get into a better place. And by being a supportive person that they can talk to when they have any kind of issues that, of course, they want to talk about, you can help them become feel safe talking to you and seeking counsel from you. So let's talk about imposter syndrome. If you're not familiar with imposter syndrome, it's a feeling that you get. I have this a lot myself, even now giving a talk at Rails. Anyway, it's a feeling that you get where you're in a position that you may have that you, for all intents and purposes, deserve and are qualified to do, but you feel like you don't belong there and you kind of feel like an imposter. It's very prevalent among newer programmers to be in a junior position and say, I have no idea what I'm doing, I don't know how to get into this complex code base, to reassure them and say, hey, not only is this very common, I've been there myself, it becomes more bearable over time. Maybe it goes away for some people, maybe it manifests in different ways. When I started developer advocacy this year, a lot of my more intense imposter syndrome feelings came rushing back to me. So it's important, as I said just now, to share those experiences, bearing in mind they're from your perspective. Only you can perceive what you've been through. And I think it's important to really drive that home to your mentee and say, listen, this is how I felt. And this is perhaps my perspective that could help you. On a more technical side, giving constructive feedback is critical towards keeping a mentee motivated. Maybe some of us have had experiences in the past where we have been told that a pull request or a change request that we've made has been complete rubbish or just really bad or really messy, and this is how this code is spaghetti or something like that. And I think it's important to bear in mind that these kinds of harsh feedbacks can really derail someone's motivation. So it's important to be able to take a step back and say, hey, listen, this looks great, thank you for this, in a pull request, for example, and using the technique of guided questions. If you're not familiar with guided questions, these are questions that lead into a discussion that enable critical thought. So you ask questions that kind of help guide your mentee towards their answer with your gentle encouragement. I'm going to show you one of the two only slides with code on this presentation. What you're looking at here is an Erb template in Rails to show in a big header what the current week number is, using the I18N gem to translate the phrase on week, right? Now, I got this code from my mentee saying, okay, on week with a space and then the week number. There's 52 weeks in a year, let's say week 18, right? And so when I looked at this, knowing that this could cause some trouble down the line, knowing my experience with Ruby, whenever I see direct concatenation of strings like this, I start thinking, is there a way that we can interpolate these strings? And then I will sit down with my mentee and ask them the question, hey, this looks great, thank you. What do you think would happen in a language, in a spoken language, not programming language, in a language where the week number is not at the end of the phrase, but in the middle of it? I cannot think of an example off the top of my head. I hope you can. But you know what I mean. And so the mentee and I will start on going down a journey of trying to figure out how we can solve this problem, say with string interpolation, or as it turns out, by guiding my mentee to the Rails guides and some of the documentation, we found out that there's a way to pass variables to these internationalized strings. So we could change this code, as you'll see in this next slide, to be able to show the on week and then pass it a variable called date, a stand-in value for that week number. And then in those different locale files, we could put in the date wherever we liked. And so we kind of went on this journey of discovery together. When doing things like this, when mentoring, it's really critical to not only maximize help, but minimize harm. When I go into mentorship, I had to invest a lot of time understanding what my privileges were as a white cis man, and being able to not only express this when I'm giving advice, but also when I'm giving advice about things that are unrelated, that are out of scope for me. I need to tell them, hey, listen, I'm sorry, I can't give you advice on this. It would be irresponsible of me to do so. And perhaps guide them to someone who has those experiences, who has those positions, and can help them out better. I think it's important to also incorporate these perspectives from my colleagues or people in my community that can better guide this person in what they're trying to do. Moving on, let's talk about listening. As a mentor, one common misconception perhaps is that you're not only talking, but you're also listening. As a mentor, I like to think of myself as a kind of on-demand rubber duck. If you're unfamiliar with it, rubber ducky programming is a concept wherein a programmer will keep a rubber duck on their desk, and whenever they're trying to understand a complex problem, they will talk to that rubber ducky, explain the problem to them, and then hopefully by vocalizing it, understand the problem they're trying to solve better. And I believe this applies to me as a person, allowing my mentee to be able to express in full what their idea is. And here's the critical part. Even if I fundamentally disagree with the perspective they're coming from, or perhaps when I say perspective, I mean if I disagree with the idea, or if I think the idea is not going to work, then I think it's important to let them voice it out anyway, for two reasons. One, out of respect, of course, but the other one is to perhaps allow them to come to that conclusion by themselves, or come up with an idea that I feel would be better. Or maybe they'll change my mind and make me realize, hold on, that's actually a great idea, without being condescending, of course. And that kind of plays in what I want to talk about next, which is the importance of learning together. As I said before, a mentorship is kind of a two-way street, isn't it? So as I was saying before, I think it's really critical that if you don't know something, don't give advice on it. Your advice is only as, you don't have to have an answer for everything. It's kind of like giving talks, isn't it? During a Q&A, I get very nervous during question and answer sessions, but it's totally fine to not know the answer. And I think this applies to mentorship as well, because it allows you to go on, as I said before, a journey of discovery with your mentee, and allows you to answer a question that you don't have the answer to, with a phrase that I really love, which is, you know what? I don't know. Let's find out. So I'm going to dive into a story from my time of teaching children to code. As I said before, we were teaching them to make games, right? Two-dimensional games in this case. So imagine what you see here on this slide is a window from a game. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at drawing. And I'm teaching them the concept of coordinates for drawing your character's position in the game. Right? And I would explain to them, this is the X coordinate, it goes along the horizontal axis. This is the Y coordinate, it goes along the vertical axis. And, as you change these values, your character will move around the screen. And when both of these values are 0, we call this the origin. And the origin, when programming games in our case, will be at the top left, right? When both values are 0, your character will be drawn at the top left of the screen. And I remember being perfectly fine with this until one of the kids I was teaching said, hey, whoa, hold on. I learned in math class that the origin is actually at the bottom left of the screen. Why are we doing with the top left of the screen? Isn't that more, wouldn't it be better to have it like in math class? And I remember at the time, this was like 5 years ago or something, I remember at the time being tempted to say, look, that's just the way it is. That's just the way this framework was designed. We could ask the maintainer or something like that. But then I remember thinking, actually, I don't know. And I would be curious to know why. I never really wondered this, because I just, during my experience, just been taking things for granted. So I told this kid, you know what? I don't know. Let's find out. So off we went to our local search engine, and we found out together that this actually comes from the way that old monitors rendered their images. What you see here is a picture of, it's a drawing of a CRT, or a cathode ray tube monitor. And the way they would render their images was by doing so in rows, from top to bottom, rendering each pixel from left to right, illuminating each pixel from left to right very, very quickly, so fast that the human eye can't perceive it. However, human eye, we do have faster eyes out there. So what I'm going to show you next is a GIF from a YouTube video I found that they took a slow motion camera, and in case you're interested, a slow motion camera, and pointed it at their TV while playing the game Super Mario Brothers, and at 10,000 frames per second. So quick warning, I'm going to put up a GIF of this shortly. It's It's gonna show the pixels illuminating, just so you know. And here it is. So here you see the Super Mario Bros. Game just going very quickly, left to right. You see and this is 10,000 frames per second. It's very, very fast. It kind of creeps me out a little, to be honest with you. But I'm fascinated that I found this out, because I now never ever hesitate to share this story because I find it amazing. And this happens in a lot of places during my mentorship experiences as well. For example, I think I've opened this search. You're looking at a search engine here, with the text "How to Exit Vim." If you, for example, git commit from the command line, it'll very likely, depending on your operating system, open Vim automatically, or VI. And perhaps you and your mentee need to sit down and figure out how on earth to quit this program. Show them your process. Show them how you would find out how to exit Vim. One of my favorite questions that I've been asked at a Rails Girls workshop while mentoring was, "Hey, Ramon, why is it called a div? Why is the HTML element called div?" Because I had no idea, just like the CRT monitor thing. I had no idea, and I had never thought of questioning it. So what did we do? We went on the internet together, and we found out that it's short for divider. So that's that. And by using by using this, we can use this as an opportunity to use guided questions to show mentees the way to their answers. And as you might have seen now, I think it really helps to show your mentee your tricks, your tips, how you go about solving problems. Show them your thinking process, either by just letting them go on your computer with you and show them how you do things, as well as you letting you drive once in a while during a pairing session as well. When I'm coding with somebody and I'm mentoring them, I try to vocalize everything I'm doing. Oh, I'm going to rename this variable. Oh, I'm going to just extract a function here just to make it a little bit easier to read for myself, and show them how you're coming about solving these problems. By doing so, you also have an opportunity to do deep dives, which is in my next session, which I call Demystify the Mystical. By which I mean, whenever you come across a topic that could be a great entry point into a deep dive, take the opportunity to check in with your mentee and say, "Hey, would you be interested in going deeper into this subject? We could just set the code aside for just a minute, and let's go into how this works." I'll show you an example in just a moment. Thank you. Yeah. For example, taking the time, I do this regularly at Rails Girls workshops, where we're learning how Rails and how servers work and that sort of thing, is to take the time to draw out a diagram with them. I apologize, this is very crudely drawn. Again, as I said before, I'm not much of an artist. I'm trying. So what you're seeing here is a diagram that I drew of how an HTTP request would work. The client would make a request to the server, and the server would respond with a response. And show them in detail how each of those works, and use that as an opportunity to also recommend other tools, other further reading that they can take up, not just in terms of reading, but also of games. I love games. For example, some of my favorites that I'm going to show you today are things like regex crossword. I always recommend this to students, to mentees when they're learning how regular expressions work, because this is super fun. It's kind of like a crossword that you solve with regular expressions. Highly recommended. Other games that I recommend are when learning, for example, CSS selectors. I love CSS Diner. It's a game to select the plates and the dishes on those plates. Try it out. Even if you have a lot of experience, it's a ton of fun. Other things include Flexbox Froggy. I love this game. It's, as the name implies, really handy for learning how to use the CSS Flexbox. By giving these tools to your mentees, it also, they get spread this way, and they can also recommend them to others and improve the overall learning and put some fun into that learning as well. But resources like books, I love practical object-oriented design. by Sandy Metz, and I lend my copy. This time I know who has my copy. um, I recommend copies of this whenever needed. I always show my mentees how helpful I find the Rails guides website. I don't think I've ever, maybe once or twice, done a migration where I don't have a tab open with the Rails guides for migrations, because it's just so well written, and showing your mentees that you resort to these resources also helps, like I said, demystify a little bit. We don't have the answers to everything, and oftentimes an illusion can be created that we do. Now, if you and going into my next topic, I think by showing these things, I think it's also important to bear in mind that even if you have relatively less experience or less knowledge, you can totally also do mentorship. All of these things are relative to one another. And I'm going to illustrate this with a story that's not actually from me, but from my sister Pilar, who is a wicked smart Ruby and Rails developer and DevOps expert. Now, when she was getting started, she went to a Rails Girls workshop. Again, Rails Girls is a series of workshops for encouraging underrepresented folks to get into Ruby and Rails and programming overall. It's been recently renamed to be a little bit more inclusive in Berlin, so I believe they're now called Code Curious in Berlin. Anyway, many years ago, my sister went to this workshop just outside of Vienna in a town called St. Pölten, and she had a great time. She learned how to do Rails from scratch and that sort of thing. And a few weeks later, there was another Rails Girls workshop taking place, and she got invited by the organizers to become a coach at that workshop. And this was only a few weeks later. And so my sister, she was like, am I really ready to be a coach? Could I really be a good mentor? I don't have a lot of experience. I only have this workshop under my belt. And what they said to her really blew my mind. They said, look, those perspectives that you have as a relative newbie, as a relative newcomer, are really valuable, because you know where you got stuck. You know what was difficult to grasp from the guides. You know the explanations that really helped you overcome that hurdle of understanding, for example, how scaffolding works in Rails. And I think that these relative experiences mean that not just you, who has a more fresh perspective, can totally be a mentor, but me, who has, let's say, more experience than that, I can also seek mentorship with people who are more my senior, and try and learn more as a process. If we're seniors, we should totally be open and, leave the ego at the door, so to speak, to seek out mentorship in things like in things like best architecture practices, that sort of thing. Bearing in mind, however, I think it's important to also think, okay, I would love to mentor. I want to mentor a lot, but I think it's very important to bear in mind that we as humans, we have energy limits. We need to take care of ourselves, and it's very tempting. I've had this in the past, where if I take on too many mentees, the quality of my mentorship suffers. If I'm mentoring lots of folks, lots of different avenues, then my availability will be less so. And I think having that availability, giving someone as a mentee, as a mentor, the comfort and the safety to be able to ask you all sorts of questions, you got to be able to do that effectively and, well rested, taking care of yourself. Otherwise your mentorship will suffer. So really, I encourage you to keep stock of your limits. If it's totally okay to say, look, I'm really sorry, but I am full up right now, maybe I can recommend you to someone else who's a mentor. This actually happened to me recently, where somebody was full up and then recommended me as a potential mentor. So all that said, the last thing I want to share with you today is, where can you, if you're convinced in mentorship, where can I as a mentor go? Where can I find folks who are seeking mentorship? I would first recommend go local. Go local to where you are, of course, bearing in mind, if it's possible, and see who's looking for what. Here in Vienna, we've got stuff like the Coder Dojo, which is an organization for getting children into coding. We've got Jugendhakt, which is a Wikimedia, and I believe it's a Wikimedia-backed initiative for getting children into coding and otherwise hacking. There's stuff like I mentioned before, the Rails Girls workshops, Rails Bridge, I believe are more stateside. I went there. I've learned of others like Pie Ladies, Rust Bridge. There's a whole bunch of these. Outreachy. These are all really, really, really positive environments where you can come and mentor. There's also, I'm probably missing out on loads of platforms that are online for be offering yourself as a mentor, and also as a mentee, find a mentor. One thing I've been trying out more that during this last very online year is to try putting out to the world, hey, I'm offering free mentorship one-on-ones of open advice. This is an idea that that was initially started by my colleague and good friend Jessica Rose. She offers these and very kindly open sourced her framework for doing these open advice one-on-ones. So since she's been doing these, I thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun if I offered these as well, but with the twist that I offer it primarily at Spanish speakers. So I'm going to show you a tweet that I wrote where I'm offering these. I started this year and I've already had a couple of sessions and it's been incredibly rewarding. So here it is. Here's what we're going to do, folks. I'm going to first read it in Spanish and then translate it into English. However, in order to do so, when I read in Spanish, the open captions are going to completely mangle this, and I don't want to ruin that. So I'm going to briefly disable the open captions in Google Slides real quick. Just find my cursor. There we go. Okay. Amiguetes, quisiera ofrecerle a gente subrepresentada la oportunidad de charlar uno a uno por 30 minutos y ofrecer consejos de carrera tech gratis. Si te interesa aprender a programar, ser independiente, encontrar trabajo, dar charlas de conferencia, hablemos. Mándame un DM y hacemos hora. Thank you for your patience. There we go. So now in English, my friends, I would like to offer underrepresented folks the opportunity to talk one-on-one for half an hour and offer free advice on their career. If you're interested in learning to code, being a freelancer, finding work, public speaking, let's talk. Send me a DM and we'll make an appointment. I usually do this by sending them a link to a service called Calendly. Oh, look, the subtitles got it right. Mostly. Anyway, yeah, and full disclosure, bit of a cheeky plug, I'm still offering these, so get in touch if you're interested in some one-on-one career advice. Can totally be in English as well. Anyway, this is a great framework because it allows you to be able to focus on one person at a time and kind of perhaps dip your toes into more long-term mentorship. Anyway, if you're moving on, if you've got open source software that you're maintaining and you've got issues that can totally be resolved with this, and you've got the time and the patience and the space to be able to do it, go ahead and tag those issues and say, hey, I would be happy to mentor you in solving this issue. It, of course, takes time. Another thing you can do is perhaps in the workplace. I know I've heard and I've read that a lot of workplaces have internal programs for mentorship. See if your workplace has one as well. Also, if they don't, that would be a great opportunity to perhaps express why it would be a good idea to have one. Maybe they have the space to allow you to say, hey, I think it would be great if we did some more mentorship, or maybe do so in a more informal fashion in your workplace. The other thing that I totally recommend doing is to start an informal community of practice. This is a term borrowed from my friend Joe Nash, who's read a lot about these. Oh my goodness, the subtitles. And what these are these open spaces where folks can just come in and hack together on whatever they're working on, be it side projects or learning to code, or gosh, I don't know, getting started in coding, maybe working on their presentations. And we have one here in Vienna. They've got lots of names. There are things like Coffee and Code. There's one that I really liked attending in Berlin called Rust Hack and Learn. Yeah, and these, we're doing these online as well. For example, in Vienna, we've got one called Study Jams. It's a study group for programming where we just get together, as said, once every 2 weeks, and just just talk about what we're working on and learn from one another. If you would rather do this by yourself, this can totally be an interesting avenue for mentorship as well, which is to learn in public. Just put your learning out there. Lots of folks are just posting their notes, their work, their thoughts, everything they're learning in a piecemeal fashion, and just putting it online for folks to find. And you can totally express your desire to mentor there as well. One book that I can recommend on this is When Working in Public: The Making and Maintenance of Open Source Software by Nadia Egbal. Super interesting. I haven't done this myself, but I would like, time allowing, to do this more. So yeah, this is the bulk of what I have for you today. What I would love for you to take away is this notion that is this desire to mentor, because I think that mentor is not only this relationship that I defined earlier, but I think it's also about knowledge sharing, and not so much so, but just the sharing the joy of sharing knowledge. So folks, I am so thankful that you've been here today with me. Here's a couple of links to resources that I've found on these topics. Check them out. There's some great books in there, as well as the Open Advice 101 framework from Jess, the games. And if you're interested in mentorship and you want to talk about it with me, please get in touch. My name is Ramon. You can find me at Twitter at Hola Soy Milk. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and enjoy the rest of RailsConf.